Hello, welcome Mappa Mondayers. Monday Mappers? Yeah, Monday Mappers, that works. Welcome Monday Mappers to Mappa Monday. Don't expect to see many of you there. Hello, Alia. Because I only advertise this in one place, which is the Hint Discord, which obviously has a limited number of people on it, and I haven't done one of these for a few weeks. So hopefully some regular viewers will spot that there's a new VOD and watch that. So hello to you regular VOD type of viewers. Good to see you. Apologies for not having been here for a few weeks. It's just been a bit crazy and I've not been around on a Monday really to do it. Lots of insomnia, lots of things happening. There you go. Life sucks. This is going to be a fairly short stream because I really don't feel up to streaming today. I have a stinking cold. Cough, scratchy throat, the beginnings of a sore throat, I feel, and I'm a little bit worried about what it's going to do to my voice, given that we have an Echoes of Legend stream tomorrow. So, a little bit worried about that. Nevertheless, I wanted to get a stream in because I haven't done one in a while. So here we are. We're going to look at something a little bit different today. Not actually making a map, but making adjustments to an existing map. So, you can see behind me that I have got my Red Helm's Peak map open. This is like the flagship map for the setting that we're playing in tomorrow. It's not actually where that game is tomorrow. That game is still in Calwyn's Bay, way to the south of here. But ultimately my goal is to bring the characters up here to Red Helm's Peak, which is where the real action in the area is. Thing is, the game that we're playing, Obsession, was written in metric. It uses meters and kilograms and things like that. However, when I started writing Simple Fantasy, which was a fantasy dungeoneering rule set for it, which is a project that got shelved, but all the work I did for it is still extant for fantasy gaming in Obsession, and that's what we're playing using in the Echoes of Legend game. For familiarity, for people coming from other games, TM, I used feet and inches. The imperial measurements, because that's what feels comfortable for them. Really, if I'm honest, I didn't use feet and inches because the character creation system still uses kilograms and centimeters for determining your character. All I really did was I did all the mapping in 5-foot squares, that, D&D style. But I'm dropping that. This is now sort of more core Obsession, and as a result, it needs to be in meters. All my maps are drawn imperial. They need to be in meters. So I thought today we would take a look at how we make that conversion using Fantasy Grounds. So we don't have to redraw everything, we can just use our existing maps. So let me swap over to a screen where you can see the map better and what I'm doing. So let's go to that screen. Now I apologise that the dialogue I'm about to bring up will not show very well unless you've got this on a big monitor. So I'll talk through it as much as I possibly can. So what I'm doing, I'm going to the File menu and down to Drawing Properties. And this gives us a number of things that we can change. So first off, our drawing style. This is the annual Fantasy Cities style, because I just really like this style. Looking at this drop down, because I own everything except this year's annual for Campaign Cartographer, there's a lot of drawing styles here. Running from 2022 Book of Maps all the way through to Temples. Lots and lots of different mapping styles for different types of maps along the way. But we're using annual Fantasy Cities, and when we come and look at that, we see, slightly disappointingly, that it is missing an option. Many of these styles, Fantasy Town, for example, have a separate metric style where everything's set up for metric measurements. And if that was the case with annual Fantasy Cities, all I'd have to do here is select Fantasy Cities metric, and it would set things up how I wanted. Unfortunately, that's not an issue, so I'm sticking with annual Fantasy Cities. And instead, down here on settings, just have a quick look over this dialogue. So the first thing is to draw tool style. Theoretically, you can chop and change that when making a map. So that is a sneaky way of being able to bring things in from other maps, from other mapping styles. I tend not to do that for fear that it will change a setting somewhere in the background. rather than just giving me access to the symbols that I'm looking for. But it is a way of doing it. If you've got two quite similar styles with basically the same settings but different mapping symbols, you can always just use that drop down to change the style to the map you want to steal a symbol from. And then once you've placed that symbol, it's on your map. You can always just copy it, or indeed, when you're looking at the symbols catalog in your map, there's an option to look at symbols that are already in the map rather than symbols in the currently active symbols catalog. So anything that's already on your map, you can always access that symbol. And that's useful if you're bringing stuff in. And sort of mixing and matching a bit between styles and between different styles to get the symbols you're looking for. Underneath that, we have a custom color palette option. We don't have a custom color palette on this, but you can create one. I'm not going to go into that, but that's what that section there is for. And then under there, it splits into two boxes. And on the right, we have the default symbol scale. And that's a checkbox. You can turn that on and off. So I'm not sure what happens if you turn that off, other than it just presumably never goes to default. It just stays at whatever you specifically told it at that moment. And that in this is defaulting to 1.0. So that's just, this is the mapping style that these symbols are created for. We're assuming that scale stays at 1. That is something you can change, obviously, depending on what you're doing. Oh, look, another bot trying to sell us things. How come this one got spotted and the last one didn't? Oh, AutoMod, you're not doing your job very well. Fortunately, it did get caught and not come through anyway. So yeah, one thing you can do, for example, is you can say to yourself, well, this mapping style is designed for a map that is, say, 1,000 by 600 miles, but I want to do a really big area map and just print out sections of it. So what if I set mine to 2,000 by 1,200, my map, instead, and I change the default symbol scale? That's one way of mixing and matching and messing around with your maps. What I actually tend to do is leave the symbol scale as it is when I draw a big map like that, because then when I zoom in, it still looks exactly like it was originally intended to, and I can just export those sections. But if you want to do a really big or really small map with a style that's not really designed for that, you can always change the default symbol scale so that everything comes in at a size that fits what you're doing. Underneath that, we have a text sheet setting. Leave empty to use current sheet. I'm not really sure about that, because there is a text sheet already. I'd have to look that one up in the Big Book O Fantasy Grounds. Not Fantasy Grounds, Campaign Cartographer. In fact, let's just have a quick look. Do I have a shortcut to it? No, I don't. I really need to create one. I've got the CC3 manual. Oh, no, yes, I do. There it is. The Tome of Ultimate Mapping is what this is called. I'm going to swing this over to the other monitor so that it appears on stream for a moment. Obviously, I don't want to be breaching Pro Fantasy's copyrights at all, but I do want to show off the Tome of Ultimate Mapping a little bit, because I think it's a really good resource for anybody using this software. So what this does, this goes way beyond just what the basic PDF manuals give you. For starters, it covers everything in the series. So starting with Campaign Cartographer 3, then we get Dungeon Designer 3, City Designer 3, Cosmographer 3, Perspectives 3, Character Artist 3, Dioramas 3. The symbol sets are covered by it. So the first 4, Fantasy Overland, Fantasy Floor Plans, Modern, and Dungeons of Schley. Then Source Maps Castles. Now, I'm assuming that the new stuff, I haven't re-downloaded this recently, and there's been stuff come out since I did last download it. So Symbol Set 5, I would imagine, which is, I think that's more Schley Overland. I have no idea how you pronounce this man's name. I apologise if I'm absolutely mangling it. I apologise to him if I'm absolutely mangling it, though he will never know. But that's how I would pronounce Schley. The Source Maps series, Castles, Temples, Tombs and Catacombs, and Cities, which is, those are quite interesting. Those sets are a series of pre-built maps and any new mapping styles that were used in order to create those maps that serve as both example maps new tools, and also just maps that you can pick up and use straight away. And they're historical rather than or historical mythological rather than completely fantasy. So each of them provides you with the castles, for example, provide you with a set of maps of existing castles that have been redrawn in Fantasy Grounds campaign cartographer. Keep going Fantasy Grounds. I'm still thinking about getting set up for tomorrow's game, so my brain is kind of jumping to the VTT. I am not in any way sponsored by Fantasy Grounds Virtual Tabletop. They don't even know I exist, apart from the fact that they've taken some of my money over the years, quite a bit of my money over the years. However, of the virtual tabletops currently available to me, Fantasy Grounds is the one I like most. I play regularly on Roll20. I don't run on Roll20 anymore, but I play on Roll20. And I started gaming on Roll20. If you are getting into running a game online for the first time, I would definitely recommend Roll20 because it has the least intrusive front end. In as much as with Roll20, you do most of the work. There are community-created character sheets for virtually every game out there. So you can get a character sheet to put your characters on. That's nice and simple. But you don't get a lot in the way of automation. And if you're using the free version of it, you don't get anything in the way of things like flashy lighting, line of sight blocking, that kind of stuff. You literally just get a map. It's exactly as if you just had a map on the table in front of you at home and put minis on it. And everything else is you've got to figure out for yourself, largely. But just as a quick way of getting a game going, Roll20 in its free version is great. I've never subscribed to Roll20 because when I felt I was willing to pay some money for virtual tabletops, I don't like a subscription model on anything. Give me a choice to buy something outright and I will buy it outright, even though it is much more expensive in the short term. For a number of reasons. One is that obviously in the long term, you always end up paying more on a subscription model because you keep resubscribing. And unless you use it for a short enough time that your subscriptions still come in at less than the purchase cost, you're wasting money on doing it that way. Me, I figured I was going to be gaming for years and I was going to keep on paying and it was going to be much cheaper with a non-subscription model. So I didn't go with the subscription model there. But if you just want those features for a quick game, you're arranging an event, for example, for something like a virtual convention or something like that, or somebody's birthday or other holiday where you're getting your friends together and saying, let's play a game. We've all got holiday time. Let's maybe book a weekend off in the summer, get together, even though we're in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and just play a game, spend a weekend playing a game. Well, just taking out 1 month subscription on something like Roll20 gives you all of the flashy features, and then you cancel it at the end, and it's the most cost-efficient option for doing that. But if you're going to be playing regularly, month after month, year after year, avoid subscription models is my advice. It's what I do. The other reason I prefer to avoid subscription models is my ADHD. Because what that means is I will ignore something for weeks, months, years on end, and then get back into it. And pick it up as if I've never left it, play it for a while, often play it quite intensively for a while, then ignore it again. That's a combination of the way that I hyperfocus on things and the way that ADHD memory essentially makes you just forget a thing exists if it's not directly in front of your face. The old maxim, out of sight, out of mind, really does apply to those of us with ADHD. Anyone watching with ADHD will obviously understand that because it's something that they will have experienced in their life. So I don't like subscription models, but Roll20 is a great virtual tabletop to first get into. My personal opinion is that you shouldn't be suckered into going from the free version to the pay-for version. You should look at what else is available when you're looking at paying some money. But your mileage may vary. There are people who really like the way Roll20 works and are happy to keep paying that subscription over and over again for that. I play on Roll20 in 2 of my games that I'm playing in on a regular basis. The one that I stream on Inwill's Twitch channel, and if you're not subscribed to that, then do take a look at twitch.tv/Inwills. That's INWILS. Inwills is a variety streamer who plays a lot of things like I think he's just restarted playing Baldur's Gate 3. He plays an awful lot of Elder Scrolls Online. And he also runs Mithras, tabletop role-playing game, on a Saturday, which is the game that I am involved in. So do check that out. He uses Roll20, the pay-for version of Roll20. The off-screen D&D game that I haven't been playing for a while because the particular campaign thread that I'm involved in has been on hiatus, but will be coming back. That is played on Roll20. And again, that's using the subscription model to get all of the things like the line of sight blocking and fancy lighting and things like that, which is very nice. But Fantasy Grounds, which I like to use, gets all that inclusive. And there's no subscription model. Not anymore. They've cancelled their subscription model. And there isn't even an upfront cost anymore. When I got into Fantasy Grounds, it cost me a fortune. I bought the Ultimate license, which meant I could run for anybody, whether they had bought a license or not. And when they swapped from Fantasy Grounds Classic and they started building the new Fantasy Grounds Unity, which is the current standard, I backed that on Kickstarter. There was a reduced price option essentially for existing owners of you, so you could get the equivalent license in the new version for less money, or you could upgrade your license for less money than if you just didn't have it at all. So I backed for the Ultimate license on that as well, and I'm very happy with Fantasy Grounds Unity. That's the version that brought in things like the line of sights, the flashy lighting, and all kinds of things like that, in addition to just running better. And because of the greater competition in the virtual tabletop scene these days, and because of the fact that two particular tabletops dominate the market now, one, because it's been there for so long, has a free option and is associated with a number of other features. That's Roll20. Roll20, for example, the company that runs Roll20 also owns the Nexus and Drive-Thru RPG. So that's all one company, and there's an element of them being tied together now, which gives you certain advantages that I can understand why people would use that. The other one being the Foundry, which simply somehow has fan appeal. A lot of people like the Foundry, and that includes a lot of game developers. So honestly, if there's a new game coming out, it's more likely to appear as an official thing on the Foundry than it is on any other VTT. That's just the way that the situation in the market works at the moment. But as a result of this, Fantasy Grounds dropped their subscription and upfront cost model, and the basic game, the core VTT is now free. So you can just sign up to a free account, get your VTT, start running. The only thing you have to pay for is if you want the specific books. So, for example, it includes all of the SRD material from things like 3rd edition, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but it doesn't include the actual rulebooks and anything that isn't in the SRD. You can buy those rulebooks, which then incorporates the complete text of the rulebook into Fantasy Grounds so that you can access it during your game, and any rules and like character classes and races and so forth that are in those are obviously brought in beyond what's in the SRD. So that's where the cost comes in. But if you're willing to put all that information in for yourself and just work from your own books, it's absolutely free to use now, as Roll20 was. But Roll20, if you're new and don't know what you're doing and you just want to quickly set up a game, Roll20 is much easier to get into than Fantasy Grounds. Fantasy Grounds is a better system, but it requires a little bit more work. It's got a bit of a learning curve on it. And then the third one that I use is indeed the Foundry. I picked up the Foundry because I had a reduced purchase price for it as a result of backing the Twilight 2000 4th edition Kickstarter. Free League, if you like Free League and Mutant Year Zero engine games, Foundry is going to be your virtual tabletop of choice because that's the one that Free League choose to go with. So most of their games, you will find there is an official release for the Foundry that gives you, as I said, all of the material from the books pulled into the game, and I got that included as a stretch goal, which included a reduced rate for buying the Foundry. So I have the Foundry because of that. Hello, Molly. You are quite welcome to hang out and lurk. I don't know how long I'm going to be streaming for. I'm currently doing a lot more talking than mapping, despite wanting to save my voice for tomorrow's game stream. But nevertheless, I kind of suckered myself into talking about virtual tabletops for some reason on a mapping stream. Though, maps are an important part of virtual tabletops, so it's a related topic. So the Foundry is the current... it's this year's boy. It really is. Everybody loves the Foundry at the moment now. I personally find the Foundry to be not to my tastes, though that's not saying there's anything actually wrong with it. There are things wrong with it there are criticisms I can level at it. It seems unfair since I haven't leveled criticisms at the other two, which also have things I can criticize about them. So I'm not going to air what those are. I'm just going to say that in feel, the Foundry is as if Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds had a baby, and it shares their DNA. And I think you can tell it's the more recent of the three systems, because presumably it started out as a one-man band, and presumably that developer had experience with both of those and brought in the things that he liked from each of those virtual tabletops, which might be why a lot of people like it. If they think the same way as him and they like the same options as him, then they're going to like what he did with the Foundry. The other thing that the Foundry has going for it, primarily, besides its massive amount of support because of how popular it is right now, is the way in which it is customizable. Now, they're all three of them customizable in their own way. Coding Fantasy Grounds involves knowing Lua, which is far less well known than the JavaScript that is used to code Foundry. So that means that a lot of people have less to learn in order to mod Foundry and make it work the way they want. So that helps make it popular. But there are issues with Foundry. There are issues with all of them. However, in terms of cost, if you're willing to learn how to use it, now that it's gone free, Fantasy Grounds gives you more for your money. The free version of Roll20 does not give you a lot of the features that are just embedded in core Fantasy Grounds, which is now free. So if you're going to be playing a lot on a virtual tabletop, I would certainly say check out Fantasy Grounds, look at some tutorials, see if you can figure it out. If you can't get your head around it, use something else. If you can get your head around it, my recommendation would always be Fantasy Grounds. I really like that. And it has some very good integral mapping tools. You can't draw a map in Fantasy Grounds, but it works very well with map assets. So if you've got tiles or elements that you can just drag and drop onto the screen to build your map up, you can produce some very good results with that. And I have done that in the past. I think I've actually done that in the past on stream, a little bit thereof. Yeah, I can understand that. Hello, Chrono. I can understand that earlier. It is annoying knowing that something supports certain features and then realizing you've got to hit a subscription model to get to them, or you've got to upgrade from the demo to the full version to get to them. That's something Fantasy Grounds never did. The way when they had a pay model, the way they worked it was in terms of who you could run for. So there was a free version that could play in people's games. Then there was the standard version that could run for other people who had the standard version, but not for free players. And then there was the ultimate version, which is what I bought back in the day, which could run for anybody. So the free players could play in an ultimate game, but they couldn't play in a free game or a standard game, if you see what I mean. So then you just did a little bit of maths juggling in your head when you were sorting it out. You thought to yourself, there's 5 of us playing in this regular campaign game. We could buy 5 standard versions, or we could pool our money together and buy one ultimate version for slightly less than the 5 standard versions, save a bit of cash, provided we don't swap GMs. The only downside comes if we swap GMs. If you're going to be swapping GMs, everybody buys a standard, and then you can mix and match and anyone can run for anyone. But it all, now they've gone free, that's no longer even an issue. But that was how they did it. You got all of the features, no matter which version you were using. It was just who you could actually GM for. So that worked out quite nicely. But I got sidetracked into that talk of virtual tabletops because I was actually talking about Campaign Cartographer and the Tome of Ultimate Mapping. As I said, I need to update my Tome of Ultimate Mapping because I'm fairly certain they must have updated it to include the new symbol sets and things that came out since I last downloaded it. I mean, I've got additional symbol sets that are not covered in this book, but I'm guessing that it's been updated to include those. It also covers, well, there's one source map I didn't mention, which is the World War II Interactive Atlas. That contains maps for various battlefields from World War II. So that's an interesting historical reference. Less for gamers, because if I'm honest, not that many people roleplay things like World War II, real world wars. There are games out there for doing that. The most popular, well-known one is probably, I want to say it was called Recon, which was a Vietnam RPG from Palladium Books. But not that many people want to play that kind of game. So World War II Interactive Atlas is, it's a standalone thing. Doesn't require doesn't require Campaign Cartographer unless you want to edit it. But again, you know, that's just provided you with a whole bunch of useful, nice historical maps if you have an interest in World War II and the way that that those campaigns played out, giving you battlefield maps showing sort of the terrain and where the different units were deployed and so forth, may well be of interest to historians with that kind of vibe. Then there's the Token Treasury, and they've done 2 volumes of Token Treasury now, and I think only one of them is included in this download. But that's a whole bunch of tokens for use on your virtual tabletop or what have you, and a whole bunch of token borders, essentially like little circles in different colors and different decorations, and you just plug the 2 together and then export that to get you a token. Sorry. Honestly, I don't feel the Token Treasury is probably the least value for money thing that Pro Fantasy make for Campaign Cartographer, but I own everything, so I've got it. And also Fractal Terrains. Fractal Terrains is wonderful. Fractal Terrains, as the name suggests, is a fractal world builder. There's a free fractal world builder called Wilbur out there, which is an excellent piece of work. And the guy who did that made Fractal Terrains based on the code from Wilbur. So there's a degree of cross-compatibility between those two. And there's some very good tutorials for using Wilbur to do things that aren't included in Fractal Terrains. So you can create things in Fractal Terrains, then go back to Wilbur to make some edits, and then bring it back to Fractal Terrains to get the best results. But since Wilbur's free, that's just an extra step rather than more money you need to pay. And there's some nice cross-compatibility as well, in that Fractal Terrains will let you generate a world, a randomly generated fractal world, play about with it, get it how you want it, export things like rainfall maps and climate maps and things like that are generated during the world generation, and also export portions of your world or your whole world in Campaign Cartographer format to be loaded into Campaign Cartographer and create your maps. So you can make your nice, lovely looking world map, and then you can pull out a section of that world map and map it for the game that you're going to be playing in that area. So that's really neat. So the Tome of Ultimate Mapping covers all of that stuff and includes some, goes into depth on a lot of its features and gives you tutorials. So starting with Campaign Cartographer, for example, we start with the basic overland map, and it gives you some blurb before you get into a tutorial. So you're getting the background on that tutorial. So it starts by talking through how you would create your map, things you have to think about before creating your map. And then we get to starting the map, and it runs through tutorializing how to build a map, which is very nice because obviously Campaign Cartographer is a very powerful piece of software. It does an awful lot. This book, in the form that I've got it at the moment, as I say, it's probably been updated to add more features that that I haven't downloaded the update for yet. But this book, as it stands in this format, is 761 pages, split across all the different products in the Pro Fantasy mapping range. So there's an awful lot in this book. It's very good indeed. And at the end, it does cover the Cartographer's annual. There's a limit to that. They can't give you detailed tutorials on every annual. They bring out an annual every month and have been doing so for years. So that would just be way too much to do, but they cover what the annual is, what it gives you, how it works. And then at the end, we've got the command reference. All the new commands from the annuals there in the annual command reference, which is kind of nice because they do they do introduce new tools. Oh, there's an example there of one of those. Actually, no, that's an annual map from the Napoleonic battle styles map, not the World War II interactive map. And again, there with each of these, so there's only 2 commands on the World War II interactive atlas, but it does give you a couple of new commands. Campaign Cartographer 3. Now that, theoretically, I would have thought that would list the commands as well. Not just the new ones, but they should be listing those commands. So, yeah, command reference for CC3+, there we go. So it starts on page 223. Now most of these, there's buttons for these commands for the most part. But sometimes it's easier just to type in a command, and there's an awful lot of things there. And it tells you, things like where to find it. It tells you what the command syntax is and gives a brief description of what it is. So you can look through that and find everything that that it will do. So that's the Tome of Ultimate Mapping. I've now completely forgotten why I wanted to talk about the Tome of Ultimate Mapping. So let's go back to the map, go back to what I was doing on the map, and maybe that will remind me why I needed the Tome of Ultimate Mapping. Oh yeah, I was wondering about the text sheet thing. It's probably in there somewhere, but I'm not going to look it up now. I'm going to cover the bit that I actually came here for, which is on the left-hand side of the dialogue at this point. So this is the settings. We have got map notes. Oops, I just cancelled the dialogue there when I cancelled that. I didn't actually mean to do that. I didn't mean to click on it. Down at the bottom, we have got protect drawing. So that protects it, essentially. Stops it being changed, which I don't want to do because I'm editing a map. And in the middle, we have drawing units. This is where I wanted to be. So this dialogue lets us set what our drawing units are when making our map. And this is really showing Campaign Cartographer's origins as a computer-aided design package. It's not just, here is an overland map. It is therefore using miles. It's, here is a drawing. Happens to be a map. What are our units? How do they work? So the drawing units, there's a drop down here, which is, you can map in inches, in feet, in millimeters, in meters, or custom. And the way that works is if you select anything other than custom, it automatically changes the things that are relevant to that. So we're in feet at the moment. And the default feet measurements are on a printed map at 1:1. It comes out as 12 inches per unit. If we swap it to meters, which is what we're talking about doing here today, is swapping our maps to work with a metric system instead of the imperial system I started with, it automatically changes that to 39.37008 inches per unit. So that's straight away, that is, rather than having to do any maths or look things up, that's just making that conversion for us. And there is a little rescale checkbox there. So if I hit OK with rescale sorted out, it will rescale the map to those measurements. Now, as I said, that inches per unit, that is on a 1:1 scale. So if you printed this map out at real world size, obviously 12 inches is a foot. 39.37008 inches is a meter, apparently. I'm willing to trust them on that. Sounds about right to me. We also have a distance display format. So if I'm just going to swap that back to feet for a moment. So the distance display format is how does it represent those distances to you? And it doesn't have to match. So I could, for example, change my distance display format to meters, which is now asking me how many decimal places I want. On feet and inches, it didn't ask me about decimal places. It instead had display to the nearest 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, whatever. There's a separate setting on there called fractional inches, which is apparently exactly the same, but doesn't use the feet, just inches, presumably. And then the one that I actually meant to point out, decimal inches. So at that point, we're still working in inches, but it's now going to tell us 3.5 inches rather than 3 3/4. So there's a lot of versatility in what you're doing with that. There's also just a numeric scale, which doesn't have anything attached to it at all. It's just purely numbers. So if I set that to meters, for the moment I'm just going to set that to meters and hit OK. This map is still built in feet and inches. The map units are in feet and inches. If I am setting a tool up, the numbers that I'm putting into it will be in feet and inches. However, if I come to the information button and I say information drop down and I say distance, and I, for example, measure the width of this road, which I know is a 10-foot wide road, it announces 3.18467 meters is the measurement that I have measured, the distance that I have measured. So even though the map is still in feet and inches, I can get it to give me results in meters. That's obviously the easiest way to convert to using metric on your map. Now, the downside is if I add a hex grid to this, or a square grid, because this city doesn't yet have a square grid. Calwin's Bay, you may recall if you've been watching me do the mapping on Calwin's Bay, I mapped that with a 5-foot square grid on it. That grid's going to go away, or at least it's going to be hidden when I convert it to metric, because I'm going to replace it with probably a 1 meter hex grid instead. The hex grids are infinitely superior. The only reason we do square grids in role-playing games is because Dungeons and Dragons started out with nice, simple graph paper based maps. And it wasn't even for battle maps. It wasn't for use in play. That was just for mapping your dungeon in the first place. It was all based on a 10-foot square grid. And then that became the 5-foot square battle grid for use with miniatures when you're gaming, and became the industry standard, so to speak, for gaming, even though it's probably one of the least useful ways to map an area. We still do it because the games are written based on that idea, which they've inherited from what was simply a behind-the-screen mapping style created in 1970, whenever the hell D&D was first made. Hexes are much better. There's a reason why if you look at war games, board rather than tabletop, rather than... a board goes on a tabletop, so that seems a silly way to distinguish them. But war games that come with a board map rather than a miniatures-based, for example, war game, they all work with hex grids. Miniatures games don't use a grid, obviously they just use measurements, but a lot of historical war games particularly tend to have a map of the historical area on a hex grid. And hexes are just so much more useful, obviously, than squares, because they give you a lot more options. If you've got a square grid, you can basically go in 4 directions from a square grid, and then you start getting into, okay, how do I calculate diagonals, which are always awkward in every game. The standard model for that tends to be your first diagonal counts as it counts normally, your second diagonal counts as 2 squares, then your third diagonal is back to normal, and you alternate between 1 square, 2 squares as you go diagonally to try and approximate the movement. You don't have that with hexes. Hexes, there are still areas where your path, if you're following the grid, is weird with hexes. But it is a lot more versatile than a grid, than a square grid. Particularly for things like, say, circles for fireballs. You can map that to hexes much more easily than you can map it to squares. So hex grid is my preference. Hex grid has been used in tabletop role-playing for a very long time. Games like Rollmaster, which was originally released in 1981, and GURPS, which again is from the 80s, they used hex grids from day one. They've always used hex grids. So it's not like this is something radically new that's come up now. It's not a modern thing. In fact, the modern thing is to ignore the fact that hexes exist and just use squares, because that's what D&D uses. The sensible thing is to go hexes. So I'm going hexes. This isn't built into the rule set for Obsession. It's not built into the mechanics. It's just the mechanics of Obsession just say distance in meters. But hexes are a much more convenient way of measuring that distance and representing that distance on boards. So I want to use a hex grid. And I will be, what I'll probably do with Calwyn's Bay, because it makes sense to me, is I will leave the 5-foot grid in place because Campaign Cartographer lets me hide and reveal that grid as desired. So what I will probably do is duplicate the grid sheet to create a grid hex sheet and put my hex grid on that so I can turn the square grid and the hex grid on and off at will according to what I'm using the map for and what I feel like at the time. So yeah, I may find, for example, that I'm using that map with players who can't get their head around hexes, in which case I can revert back to the map, to the square grid, because it's there in Campaign Cartographer waiting for me to do it. If, on the other hand, my players are cool with hexes because they think that hexes are cool, then I can use the hex grid. And it's just a matter of selecting what information I want to be on my map and re-exporting it with that information visible and the information that is hidden not visible. It's one of the things I love about Campaign Cartographer. It makes it so versatile that you can, provided you've got them set up properly, you can hide and reveal either sheets or layers. I don't work a lot with layers because the sheets have really superseded them and they're not so important anymore. Hexagon, the bestagon, absolutely. But I love the versatility of that, being able to put all the information you want on one map. You don't need a separate GM and players map. You export a separate GM and players map, but you don't need it in Campaign Cartographer. You just hide the GM information for the player map and then really reveal it again for the GM map. Maybe there's stuff that you don't want on the GM's map that does go on the player's map, like, for example, a solid bit of wall where there's actually a secret door. You can remove that stuff when you're printing the GM's map. But you don't need to make the map more than once. You just put all the information on different sheets and hide and reveal according to what you feel like. And that is so versatile and so useful compared to, not compared to the proper mapping software that is out there, if you'll excuse the word proper, but compared to the cheaper and more quick game orientated mapping software that's out there. You know, whether it be web-based software or downloadable software, whether it be low price or free, or in some cases expensive. There is a lot of software that is just designed to quickly create you a map. And what they lack often, for the convenience, you lose out on the versatility. Campaign Cartographer is expensive. But if you want to put some serious work into your maps and get some serious results, Campaign Cartographer will give you those results. If you're a more casual GM and you just want to be able to throw out a map that is good enough for your players, maybe not Campaign Cartographer. Maybe there are cheaper options that you can use. Maybe some of those options will do funky things like export the map with the line of sight mapping already included for Foundry. I don't think there's any that export with Fantasy Grounds. If there is, I need to find them. But there certainly are things that will export a line of sight map for Foundry alongside the map that you've created. But you tend to be building from their assets. And you do that in Campaign Cartographer, but there's a lot more assets. And there's obviously the ability to draw your own and incorporate them as a new symbol set. And you can build your own symbol sets. That's exactly what happens with the Cartographer. The Cartographer's annuals is people from the community create symbol sets for their maps. People at Pro Fantasy see those maps and say, that is a really cool looking map. That's obviously using custom created symbols and tools. Let's get in touch with that person and see if we can get them to produce us a map, an annual entry. So then other people get access to that symbol set to be able to use it. And it's a really great way that the community interacts with the developers there. And presumably community members can make a bit of money out of it. So yeah, the downside to this method, which is all I've done, is I've just changed the reporting method. It's still measuring in feet, but it's doing that conversion when I ask it for a distance, and it's telling me this is 3 meters rather than this is 10 feet. And one of the cool things about that is obviously these are accurate conversions because they're being done by a computer with accurate numbers to however many decimal places, rather than my guesstimate of, okay, well, we'll call this 1.5 meters for this 5-foot square, which is what most people tend to be doing when they're trying to swap back and forth between the two things. But the downside is that if I go draw hex grid and I set up a hex grid here, and I say, okay, so I want a 1 meter hex grid, so I'm going to call this 1. That's not 1 meter, that's 1 foot. Because the underlying map is still using those distances. So I'm going to select points here. I'm going to undo this afterwards, obviously, but just by way of demonstration, I'm going to select points. I'm going to select an area of this map. And this is being really slow, and the reason this is being really slow is because it's drawing in a ghost image of a 1 foot hex grid over what I'm doing here. And there it is. There is our 1 foot hex grid. If I zoom in on this, there is entirely our hex grid. And I can go information, distance, and I can measure the distance between two hexes, 0.30480 meters, i.e. 1 foot. As I said, it's telling me in meters, but it's still drawing in feet. So in order to make this work, I have to do some calculations. First, I have to delete this grid. Come on, delete the damn hex grid. All right, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to see if I can undo that draw. Yeah, good. I didn't mess up and put something else in the way of the undo command. So what I need to do instead, if I want to put in a 1 meter grid on the map done this way, is I need to work out what a meter is in feet and inches and give it that number, that accurate number. So that's one way of doing it. That's the simplest way of doing it, just for having your map give you meter values. But that doesn't affect my exports in any way. I'm still kind of guessing, because ultimately it's still exporting a map that is drawn in feet and inches. Useful within Campaign Cartographer, not so useful elsewhere. The other way of doing it is actually to change the drawing units themselves. And this is where things start getting awkward. Particularly if you're like me and you like to use the effects. The effects sheets are what make Campaign Cartographer as good as it is, what makes the maps look as good as they are. But everything in that is set up. Actually, I'm going to come out of this dialog and I'm going to look at the effects dialog. So let's pick a sheet. Let's go with the buildings sheet. So we've got a number of effects on here. We've got a bevel, a drop shadow, 2 glows, and a texture rise. So let's look at the drop shadow. No, let's look at the bevel first. So if we edit that bevel, that has a length of 4 units, a strength of 30%, fade 100%, and the effect units here are map units. Any effect can be done in one of 3 ways for its units. The unit can be percentage of view width, in which case the effect will look the same no matter how zoomed in or out you are. That's like an on-screen version of it. If you're using your map within Campaign Cartographer, then percentage of view width makes sense because it'll look the same no matter what level of zoom you're using. Map units, which is what I always default to because I want the map to look. I want the map to look like the map wherever my zoom level is, rather than the effect to look like the effect wherever my zoom level is, if that makes sense to you. And then the third one is the percentage of drawing extents width. So that's a bit like percentage of view width in terms of the effect scale is going to be the same no matter how zoomed in or out you are. So the drop shadow will be the same amount of drop shadow if you're looking at it from a mile away as it is if you're looking at it from 5 feet away, which does mean that the further out you zoom, the bigger that drop shadow is in real terms. But rather than based on the view, it's based on the drawing extents. So that option effectively scales all of your effects to the map. I always use map units. I like to keep them solid. Now, the other two are good options, and for other people, they definitely do work, obviously. My brain likes if I set a drop shadow, I want that drop shadow to be that drop shadow, not for it to be variable based on my view or the size of the map. I just want it to be that drop shadow. The downside to doing it that way is hitting me now. Because if I change my drawing from feet and inches to meters, this is measured in units. So if my unit ceases to be a foot and becomes a meter instead, then instead of a 4-foot bevel, it's a 4-meter bevel, which is obviously over 3 times the size of a 4-foot bevel, and it will change the effect significantly. I can actually do that and show you. I'll come out of this and go back to the draw distance. Actually, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so it's more obvious. Zoom in on that gate area. And if I go drawing properties, drawing units, and I change the drawing units to meters, the moment I hit OK, the look of all of these buildings will change. There we go. Because the bevel on those buildings is over 3 times what it was before. And suddenly everything looks like it's got a dome on top of it. Because the bevel's moved in so far that, except on a really big building, it's going to look almost like a dome. Now, that actually doesn't look bad. If you want domed buildings in your city, then by all means, give them an extensive bevel. You can set that up, of course, on the building types. On these round ones, it looks really cool. They really do look like domes. So you can put a dome into your map by setting up a separate effect sheet for those types of buildings. And anything that you assign to that effect sheet is going to have that greater bevel and that dome look on the top. So in a lot of fantasy worlds, towers and spires and domes and things are a big deal. So if you have each of them on their own sheet and change the effects for them, you can get a really good effect out of that. Again, we're back to the versatility of Campaign Cartographer and how well it works. But what I've accidentally, knowing full well I was doing it, done here is I've made all of my buildings look like that, which is not what I wanted. So that's not necessarily a big problem. All I actually need to do is go into the building sheet, go to that bevel, edit it, and say, well, I don't want a 4-meter unit. I'm not going to do an exact number. I'm just going to change it to 1, say, and have a 1-meter bevel instead. And when I apply that, redraws everything, and the buildings go back to something approximating what they looked like before, which is nice. It's handy. That's absolutely how we want it to be. Their shadows are still over 3 times the size they used to be, because I haven't changed that yet. But the bevel's back to normal. It's not quite back to normal, and I'm going to show that in a moment. And this gets a little bit awkward, because this has got an offset of 2 feet. So I can't really just say 1 meter again for this, because we went from 4 feet to 1 meter. What are we going to do with 2 feet? Well, I'm going to make an approximation. I'm going to call it like 2/3 of, we're going down to roughly a third. So 2/3. I'm actually going to round that, and I'm going to say 0.75 on the offset on those, just because I think that will look reasonable. Leaving everything else exactly as they are. Apply that. And our shadows are looking reasonable again. That's now acceptable. We've still got this same issue with the glow. However, the glows are bigger than they used to be. Those were originally strength 0 with a blur radius of 5. Let's change that blur radius to 1.5. Okay on that one. And then the second glow has a blur radius of 2. So again, let's go to 0.75 on that. And so, oops, I put an extra 0 in there, which I did not want to do. And then when I apply those changes, our shadows are looking a little bit more like, glows rather, are looking a little bit more like they used to, and not unreasonable. for the most part, but not entirely, and I will explain why. Over here, we've got a tower. And if I zoom in on the area around that tower, we can see that that tower is still messed up in a couple of ways. Firstly, it's still got a dome. Why has the tower still got a dome? We fixed that, surely. We didn't, actually. Oh, thank you, Automod, for snagging another one of those little bastards. So the reason is because I've got more than one building sheet, and I've only edited one of them. So the more flash you get with your map, the more work is involved in making these conversions. Far better, and this is good advice, I feel, far better, sort your bloody measurements out before you start. Don't be an idiot and change them later, like me. So this is the tall buildings sheet. So if we look at tall buildings, we see exactly the same effects, but with a greater drop shadow to indicate the taller building. So that means I've got to make exactly the same changes here as I have done on the other map. There is a cheaty way of doing this, theoretically. I could, for example, delete the glows and delete the bevel. Then I go to buildings. I select the glows and the bevel. I copy. I go back to tall buildings. I paste. And then I refer to buildings to see what order these need to be in, because it does apply them in that order. So you get a different effect if they're applied in a different order. And it goes bevel, drop shadow, glow, glow, texturize. So we need texturize all the way down at the bottom. And we need the drop shadow after the bevel. And now we're close. The shadow's wrong, but everything else is right. I didn't copy the shadow because obviously I need to edit that anyway, because it's got a bigger shadow. On the other one, I believe I set the shadow to 0.75. So to get me double that shadow, I'm going to go 1.5 on this one. Okay, apply. And now our tower is back to looking sort of how we expected it to look. So it's not a lot of work to make these changes, but it is work. Now, if I'm thinking in terms of maximum usability and availability, one thing that I could do here, and this is extra work, but really sneaky for people who might want to produce generic material, because of course anything you make in Campaign Cartographer is yours. The purchase of the software, the license under which the software is delivered to you, the EULA, includes the right to release maps created with it in commercial format. So you cannot resell the assets, but you can resell the end results, which is really nice because it means you can use Campaign Cartographer to create the map for your game world and then sell that game world as a source book, for example, or the same for an adventure. So if you want generic material that can be used in different games, what you could do, of course, is you duplicate every single one of these layers, every single one of these sheets. You copy everything, all of the buildings, to a buildings metric sheet, for example, and you put the effects in at metric on that one. And that lets you hide the appropriate layer, hide or reveal the appropriate layer to export it in feet or export it in meters. And in a lot of respects, it doesn't make a great deal of difference. If it's looking right, it's looking right at the end of the day. And the only thing you really need to change to do it in meters rather than feet is the grid. Because that's the grid and the scale compass, the scale is the only part that really needs to be changed. But if you're an absolute perfectionist, you could change the whole thing and have two versions of the map, one in feet and one in meters, existing within the same file, and just hide the parts of it that you don't want to be revealing. As I say, far simpler just to put the effectively to have a cartouche and cartouche metric layer and a grid and grid metric layer, because those are the only two parts that really need to change between those, and you can just quite happily do it that way. There are a couple of other places that these changes to the distance are going to make an effect, and I will show you one of those while I'm here. I'm going to zoom right out And then I'm going to zoom back in a little bit because we don't need to see the stuff around the outside of the city. We're only looking at the city itself for purposes of this. So we'll zoom in to just show the city. You'll notice that at the moment, while I've got the neighborhood coloring, I don't have, and I can turn that on and off. Again, just let's show this off. If I hide the neighborhood sheet, apply that. Low, it's now just a city map. No longer shows the neighborhoods. So that's more the map that you'd want to be exporting for player, for VTT use when moving the players around. But you might give the players a second copy of the map, maybe a lower resolution copy of the map, with the neighborhoods included, so that they can tell what parts of the city are what. Because that's quite a cute thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the neighborhood labels. These are going to go wrong. Now, they haven't gone massively wrong, but they have gone wrong. And the reason for that is because they've got a glow on them. And that glow, I think they may have a drop shadow as well. Yeah, they've got a glow and two glows and a drop shadow on them. And again, the map units have changed. So therefore, the look of those effects have changed. This first glow is a blow radius of 12. That's nice and easy. I can stick with my 1/3 approximation and just change that to 4. Second glow is 8. 8 does not divide quite so well. I'm going to call it, let's say, we'll round up a bit and go 2.5. And our drop shadow is 4 units, so we'll go 1.5 on the drop shadow. And now our labels look a little bit more like we wanted them to, rather than being quite so in your face with the big glow. And the drop shadow that was too far away to really be noticeable as a drop shadow. Keeping the drop shadow close in actually makes it far more visible. I'll zoom in and show that, because on my 32-inch monitor it looks very clear to me, but on whatever little screen you're watching the stream on, it probably will look less clear. So let's zoom in on the Eastgate neighborhood. And hopefully you can now see, yeah, that drop shadow just sits underneath, and it looks like you've actually got physical letters floating above the map, which is a design choice. You may not like that. You may like that. I like it, so that's what I'm using. I could turn that off, not have that shadow there, and it would make no difference to the informational qualities of the map. It would just make a difference to its aesthetics. I happen to like the aesthetics with the drop shadow. There it is without the drop shadow. I like the drop shadow. So we'll turn that drop shadow back on. So that's the neighborhood labels sorted. I'm going to hide them again. I'm going to look at the text labels. I don't think I've got many text labels. I say I don't think I've got many text labels. I tell a lie. I've got a bucket load of text labels, but only in certain portions of the city, because I never got around to mapping the rest of the city. These obviously are points of interest. So if we zoom back in on Eastgate again, we can see that we have got, within Eastgate, we've got 15 points of interest in that neighborhood. And all I've done is literally just drop